Daniel Roberts grew up in a neighborhood where hope often felt like a rare commodity. As a boy, he watched neighbors struggle to pay rent, saw friends' parents juggling multiple jobs, and listened to too many stories of doors closing before they could even knock. He was shy, thoughtful, and keenly aware of the limits around him. Yet even in the toughest moments, when the power went out for days or when food on the table was never guaranteed, he held on to a quiet belief that life could be better. This belief would shape everything he became. In school, Daniel was neither the loudest nor the most popular, but he had a sharp mind and an unquenchable curiosity. He spent hours reading library books about computers late into the night, long after his classmates had drifted off to sleep. While other kids played video games, he taught himself to code, piecing together small programs that amazed his teachers. By the time he was in high school, his simple scripts had grown into tools local businesses used to track inventory and manage small payrolls. He charged next to nothing, more interested in solving problems than making money. When Daniel graduated, scholarship offers came in fast. He chose a state university known for its computer science program and worked part-time jobs to cover living expenses. He balanced classes, tutoring sessions, and a night shift at a grocery store, all while dreaming of a startup that could change the world. After college, he moved to a bigger city, joined a tech incubator, and spent months refining an idea, an algorithm that could help companies predict equipment failures before they happened. Investors noticed, funds came in, and soon he had the seed money to launch his own company. Within 5 years, that company turned into a multi-million-dollar success. Clients ranged from manufacturing plants in the Midwest to logistics firms abroad. Daniel hired the best engineers he could find and insisted on a company culture rooted in kindness and respect, values he had learned at home when his parents faced hardships together, supporting each other through every setback. Despite the rapid growth, Daniel refused to lose sight of his roots. He made sure every new employee knew the story of his first days, coding by candlelight during storms, and he offered mentorship programs for young people from underprivileged backgrounds. One spring, after closing a major deal that set the company's valuation soaring, Daniel surprised everyone by announcing he was taking a sabbatical. Not to relax on a yacht, but to travel with a purpose, to learn more about global challenges and find ways to help. He reached out to a network of nonprofits and humanitarian organizations and arranged to spend time in communities facing poverty, displacement, and conflict. His plan was simple: listen, observe, and seek out projects where his resources could make a real difference. His journey led him to Southeast Asia, where he spent days in rural villages learning about agricultural cooperatives and nights in city centers meeting activists and aid workers. On one humid afternoon, while discussing water purification methods, with a local engineer, Daniel heard whispers of a darker reality. An aid worker mentioned a hidden trafficking ring operating from remote compounds, selling young girls into forced labor. No one spoke of it openly, afraid that the traffickers watched every message and every traveler passing through. Yet hints of this cruelty traveled along the same routes that carried relief supplies. Daniel felt a familiar stir in his chest, the mixture of anger and determination he had known as a child witnessing neighbors suffer. He thought of the late nights spent imagining what he could do to help, of the times he wished for more power to protect the powerless. Now, with the means and the skill to investigate, he could not turn away. Though many urged caution, local authorities could be corrupt, and outsiders asking questions risked drawing unwanted attention. Daniel decided to learn more. He knew he would need information, allies, and discretion. He began by making quiet inquiries through the aid network. He spoke with drivers who delivered supplies to isolated areas, asking if they had ever noticed guarded ramps or trucks moving at odd hours. He talked to healthcare volunteers who treated malnourished children, gently asking where the worst cases originated. Bit by bit, a picture emerged. A cluster of compounds hidden in dense forests guarded by armed men and kept secret by bribes and intimidation. No official routes led there. Supplies came in on back roads and through unmarked checkpoints. As Daniel delved deeper, he tapped into his company's technology. He used satellite imagery paired with machine learning algorithms to spot unusual clearings and new construction in forested regions. He cross-referenced this with shipping data, fuel deliveries, water tankers, and food supplies that hinted at human occupancy. Each piece of data brought him closer to pinpointing the compound's location, but he moved cautiously. He encrypted his communications, used burner phones, and met contacts in crowded markets where few would notice another face in the throng. At night, in a small guest house with a creaky fan and thin walls, Daniel pulled up maps on his laptop, tracing routes and studying guard patterns. The secrecy of the operation weighed heavily on him. He thought of the young girls held captive, day after day, in cells far from any help. He thought of his own childhood fear. What if no one had come for him when he needed help? That fear drove him. He vowed that if he found the location, he would act decisively. By the end of his first month in the region, Daniel had narrowed the site to a tucked-away valley surrounded by rocky hills. Local informants spoke of distant whistles to signal arrivals and saw military-style vehicles coming and going at dawn. The compound was isolated, but not impossible to reach. Daniel shared his findings with a handful of trusted advisors back home, former military officers and human rights lawyers who could plan a rescue mission and handle the legal aftermath. Though the stakes were high, Daniel felt certain that letting the trafficking continue was far riskier. As he prepared for the next phase, Daniel's mind often drifted back to his own journey, from a boy who felt powerless to a man who controlled the resources needed to make a real difference. He remembered his parents' unwavering belief in him, even when times were darkest, and he promised himself that he would honor that faith by acting with courage and compassion. The discovery of the compound was only the beginning. What happened next would test every skill he had learned and every value he held dear. But Daniel was ready. He carried the weight of responsibility lightly, convinced that the chance to save even one life made every risk worthwhile. Daniel Roberts knew that planning a rescue mission in a foreign land was not something to take lightly. He understood that every detail mattered, and that the stakes could not be higher. With the compound's location identified deep in that isolated valley, he began assembling the team and resources he would need. From the very start, he made it clear to everyone involved that the mission's success depended on trust, respect, and a shared commitment to saving lives. First, Daniel reached out to two former special operations officers he had met through his family's charity work in the United States. Both were expert strategists who had led complex missions in challenging environments. He asked them to review the intelligence he had gathered, satellite images, local witness reports, and supply delivery patterns, and to advise on the best way to approach the compound without drawing attention. The officers, impressed by the quality of the data and Daniel's careful preparation, agreed to travel to Southeast Asia. While waiting for their arrival, Daniel shifted focus to the legal aspects. He contacted a respected human rights lawyer who specialized in international anti-trafficking cases. This lawyer would ensure that any action taken would protect the rights of the rescued girls and hold the traffickers accountable in a court of law. Together, they discussed how to document evidence properly, how to handle media inquiries, and how to coordinate with trustworthy local authorities, if possible. The goal was clear: rescue the captive girls, then support them through recovery, and finally see that justice was served. As the special ops advisors and the lawyer arrived, Daniel rented a discreet villa on the outskirts of a nearby town. It was far enough from the compound to avoid suspicion, but close enough for quick travel when it was time. Inside, he converted one room into a planning center. Walls were covered with large printed maps of the valley and its surroundings. A whiteboard displayed a timeline of events, guard rotations, and possible escape routes. Every evening, under the soft yellow glow of a desk lamp, Daniel and his team would gather around a table strewn with laptops, notebooks, and steaming cups of tea. The first step was reconnaissance. Daniel's team arranged for aerial footage, using a rented drone outfitted with a high-resolution camera. Flying the drone in the cool morning hours when the winds were calm, they captured clear images of the compound's perimeter fence, guard towers, and supply delivery points. The drone operator, a quiet but confident technician Daniel had hired locally, transmitted the footage back to the villa, where the team paused the video frame by frame, marking points of interest. They noted that each guard tower had 2 men, armed and alert, but that the guards changed shifts at dawn and dusk. The perimeter fence was about 10 feet high, topped with barbed wire, and set back about 30 feet from the guard towers, enough space for dogs to patrol if they were used. Supply trucks arrived twice a week, pulling up to a large loading dock on the east side of the compound. These trucks brought food, water, and other necessities, but never anything that might alert officials to unusual activity. Most trucks were unmarked or had fake commercial logos. Next, the team sent in eyes on the ground. 2 local guides who understood the terrain perfectly volunteered to watch from vantage points atop the surrounding hills. They used binoculars and cameras with telephoto lenses to confirm guard routines and to see if there were any hidden entrances. For 2 weeks, these guides made daily treks, returning each night with fresh information. Guards always paused for a brief meal at midday in a small wooden shack by the fence's northwest corner. On clear nights, lanterns glowed in specific windows of the main building. And on one occasion, a group of men in dark uniforms had been brought in, possibly new recruits or reinforcements. Daniel encouraged his team to remain cautious, but optimistic. He held nightly briefings where everyone was invited to voice concerns or suggest alternatives. He listened carefully and made adjustments based on feedback. When the local lawyer raised the possibility of involving a trusted regional police chief, Daniel agreed to meet privately with that chief, cautious about revealing details but seeking to secure a safe house and medical support in case of injuries. The chief, a stern man with a reputation for integrity, offered to station 2 officers nearby on the night of the operation, under the condition that they remain unarmed until the raid began. With reconnaissance complete and some local support secured, the team turned to logistics. They needed reliable vehicles, medical supplies, communications equipment, and non-lethal disabling tools. Daniel purchased 2 rugged all-terrain trucks with local license plates. Inside, he stowed stretchers, first aid kits, blankets, and bottles of clean water. He also acquired handheld radios with encrypted channels, ensuring the team could stay in contact without fear of interception. For non-lethal disabling tools, he selected high-power flashbang devices to disorient guards and cutting tools strong enough to free anyone chained or locked in a cell. Training exercises followed. In a field outside the villa, the former special ops, officers led the group through simulated breach scenarios. The team practiced moving in silence, using hand signals to communicate, and timing their approach so that they would reach the perimeter fence at the precise moment when guard numbers were lowest. Daniel himself joined in every drill, climbing simulated walls, crawling through mock barbed wire sections, and carrying weighted backpacks to mimic the extra load of stretchers and gear. He insisted on sharing the physical risks. This was not a desk-bound operation, it was real, and every person involved needed to understand exactly what to expect. Throughout these drills, Daniel emphasized 2 things. First, that the mission was about saving lives, not defeating enemies, and second, that unnecessary force would not be tolerated. Guards would be subdued, not harmed, and the priority was to protect the young girls. The team practiced using the flashbangs in a cleared area, noting the device's effective range and the brief window of distraction they created. They also practiced quickly sliding through cut sections of the fence and signaling back to the trucks parked a few hundred yards away. Meanwhile, the human rights lawyer worked on documentation and care plans. He prepared legal release forms so that once the girls were free, they could be moved legally across borders if needed for safety. He coordinated with a nearby medical clinic and arranged for psychologists and social workers to be on standby at a safe house once the rescued girls arrived. Daniel wanted to ensure that rescue was only the first step, that these young survivors would find a path to healing, education, and independence. As the final day of preparation approached, tension and excitement filled the villa. The team packed gear into the trucks, double-checked radios, and reviewed the timeline down to the minute. Daniel called each member by name, thanking them for their courage and dedication. He reminded them that they were not just rescuers, but messengers of hope to girls who had known only despair. At dusk, Daniel and the former special ops leaders drove the trucks toward the valley under cover of darkness. The two local guides followed in separate vehicles, ready to lead the way to the staging point. Daniel's heart pounded not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility. He knew that success meant not only freeing the girls, but giving them a chance at a new life. Failure was not an option he was willing to accept. Reaching the staging point, a hidden clearing in a cluster of bamboo trees, the team stopped. Engines off, they removed blankets from the truck beds and unfolded stretchers. Each person checked their partner's gear one last time. Radio battery, levels, spare cutting discs, first aid packets. In the dim light, Daniel looked around at faces illuminated by the faint glow of a single lantern. He saw determination, compassion, and quiet resolve. He gave a nod and the team slipped into the jungle, moving like shadows toward the compound that held so many secrets and so much suffering. The secret operation was set in motion. Every step had been planned with care. Every risk had been weighed. And at the center of it all was the steadfast promise Daniel had made, to bring the captive girls back to freedom, no matter the cost. 3. Daniel's team moved through the dense jungle under the cover of darkness, their steps soft on the mossy ground. Every sense was alert. The crackle of dry leaves underfoot, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft whisper of wind through bamboo stalks. They kept to the narrow paths the local guides had scouted, avoiding open clearings where moonlight might expose them. Daniel's heart beat steadily as he led the way, flashlight dimmed, eyes trained ahead. He remembered every detail from their rehearsals, the timing of the guard shift change, the layout of the fence, the position of the supply dock. Each member carried only what was necessary: cutting tools, stretchers, flashbangs, radios set to the encrypted channel. No one spoke except for occasional hand signals. When they reached the perimeter fence, barely 30 feet stood between them and the compound's heavy gates. The two special ops officers signaled for silence, and Daniel felt the cool metal of the cutting tool against his palm. A soft hiss and the quiet scrape of metal on metal marked their work as they cut a small opening low in the fence. Sparks flew for a moment, but the foliage muffled any glow. With a smooth motion, they bent the wires back just enough to slip through. Heart pounding, Daniel crouched behind a shrub, motioning for the others to follow. Inside the fence, the compound lay in semi-darkness. The guard towers stood sentinel, but only one man remained at his post, his companion already having moved to the nearby break shack for the midday meal, just as the reconnaissance had revealed. Daniel counted silently, one guard up top, alone. A flashbang was primed on a folding stock. Its gentle click sounded enormous in the still night air. At Daniel's signal, two team members crept forward. They tossed the device just beyond the guard's tower and ducked back. A sudden burst of light and a loud pop startled the guard, and in the moments of confusion, the officers moved in, quickly securing him with zip ties. The guard's shout was muffled, and then silence returned. With the perimeter secured, Daniel's team advanced toward the main building. They stayed low, using the shadows of supply crates and parked trucks to remain hidden. One of the guides paused, showing them a barely visible service entrance, an unmarked door on the building's east side. It was unlocked from the inside. The guides had assured them, since it was meant for maintenance staff. Daniel tested the handle gently. The door swung open without a sound. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a stairwell. The air smelled faintly of bleach and oil. They moved quickly up the stairs, guided by the glow of emergency exit signs, and emerged on the second floor. Here the girls were kept in several small rooms converted into cells. Daniel's team had rehearsed cutting locks in moments, but the easy sight of the simple wooden doors, each secured with a heavy padlock, still caused his breath to catch. He knelt by the first door and used the cutting tool to slice through the lock's metal shackle. Sparks flew, and with a soft clang, the lock fell away. Inside sat a girl of about 12 or 13, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She turned at the noise, eyes wide with fear, and Daniel offered her his hand in a calm, steady voice. "We're here to help. You're safe now." Her shoulders shook, but she placed her small hand in his. He guided her out gently. One by one, they worked down the row of cells. Some girls cried softly, some stared in stunned silence. A few clung to one another. Daniel kept his voice soft but firm, telling each girl that they were free and that help was coming. The team moved quickly to remove any remaining obstacles, chains, locks, and barricades, pausing briefly to reassure the girls and to wrap them in warm blankets the medical team had prepared. Every sound echoed: the zipper of a blanket, the soft breathing of a frightened child, the shuffling of feet on the concrete floor. Meanwhile, a small group secured the rooftop, where a second guard had been spotted during drone surveillance. They used non-lethal foam projectiles to seal the guard in a room, preventing him from raising the alarm. The guard pounded on the door, but when the door was carefully opened, they found him dazed and unharmed. He lay on the floor, blinking, up at the ceiling as the team tied his hands behind his back. One of the guides murmured to him in his native language, "Tell no one and you will not be hurt." Then they moved on. With all the girls gathered in the hallway, Daniel called in their location via radio to the waiting trucks. Within minutes, the engines rumbled softly, approaching the service entrance where the women and girls would exit. Daniel helped the youngest girl into awaiting arms, carrying her gently through the open door to safety. Behind him, the others followed in a steady flow. The night air was cool against their flushed faces. Guides led them quietly to the trucks where paramedics moved among them, offering water, checking for injuries, and comforting sobbing girls as they settled onto stretchers or fold-up seats. As the trucks pulled away, Daniel paused to look back at the compound. The faint glow of lanterns shone through the empty windows, but soon those lights would be gone. He felt a wave of relief and pride, but also deep compassion for what the girls had endured. He vowed in his heart that this would not be the end of their story. Once they were safely away, the team set the trucks on a winding route back to the safe house, avoiding main roads and checkpoints. No one spoke until Daniel gave the all-clear signal in the radio. "We're on the move. Everyone is safe." Inside the safe house, plain rooms had been prepared for the girls. The walls were painted in soft pastels, and nurseries were stocked, with toys, books, and comfortable beds. Psychologists and social workers stood ready, offering warm smiles and gentle words in the girls' native languages. Medical staff checked each girl's vitals, cleaned minor wounds, and wrapped any bruises. Daniel watched as a nurse handed a trembling girl a cup of warm broth, her small hands cupped tightly around it. The girl sipped slowly, then looked up, her eyes meeting Daniel's. In that moment, his heart swelled with gratitude, not for his own safety, but for the chance to provide a sanctuary for these young survivors. As dawn's light crept through the curtains, Daniel convened his core team in a quiet living room. They reviewed every detail: the number of girls rescued, the condition they were in, and the evidence left behind: photographs, documents, and audio recordings of the guards' conversations. The human rights lawyer listened intently, making notes on how to present the case to international authorities. Daniel knew the rescue mission was only the beginning. Now came the work of healing and justice. But for the first time since arriving in that distant land, he allowed himself a moment of stillness, knowing that in one night he and his team had turned fear into freedom and darkness into hope. Daniel Roberts watched from the back of the crowded hall as reporters, aid workers, and curious onlookers filled every seat. The safe house grounds had been converted into a makeshift press center, with rows of folding chairs facing a simple wooden podium draped in a white cloth. Behind the podium, banners displayed the logos of Daniel's foundation and several human rights organizations that had partnered in the rescue. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Despite the hushed voices and clicking cameras, Daniel felt a calm clarity. Today, everything would change. At precisely 10 o'clock, Daniel stepped up to the podium. He wore a tailored, dark suit, unfussy, respectful, and adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, noticing the flash of cameras and the expectant faces of journalists from outlets around the world. With a steady voice, he began by recounting the operation, how the girls had been identified, the careful planning, and the successful rescue. He spoke of his team's courage and the tireless work of local guides and legal experts. Every sentence emphasized the girls' bravery and resilience, honoring them as the true heroes. After a few minutes, Daniel paused and stepped aside, cueing the human rights lawyer seated nearby. The lawyer briefed the audience on the legal steps to protect the girls' identities and rights, and on plans to provide long-term care and education. Then, with a respectful nod to Daniel, he introduced the youngest survivor who would speak. A hush fell as 14-year-old Amina emerged from behind a curtain, supported by a gentle hand from a social worker. She wore a simple blue dress and carried her own small bouquet of flowers, a gift from a local volunteer, her eyes bright and clear fixed on the audience. Amina approached the microphone with quiet confidence. She paused, taking a breath, and then spoke in softly accented English, her words clear and deliberate. She described the cramped cell, the loneliness, and the fear she had felt. She spoke of the moment Daniel and his team appeared, how she thought it was a dream at first, and how she realized slowly that she was truly free. The cameras captured every expression, the compassion on Daniel's face, the pride in the lawyer's eyes, and the astonishment creeping across the reporter's features. Then came the revelation that brought the room to stunned silence. Amina held up a small envelope, its edges worn. "This came to me through a friend inside," she said, her voice unwavering. Inside were photographs, receipts, and messages, proof that the funds for the compound had been traced back not to faceless criminals, but to a man of significant influence, a senior government official in a neighboring country. The official's name, once whispered in fearful tones, now echoed loudly in the hall. Reporters gasped, and pens scratched frantically across notepads. Amina continued, her voice firm. "I never imagined someone so powerful would use their position to harm children, but now that I have this evidence, I want the world to know." She handed copies of the documents to Daniel, who passed them to the human rights lawyer. The lawyer promised to deliver them immediately to international authorities. A wave of murmurs swept through the room as journalists realized the implications. An entire network of complicity, protected by political power, could be exposed. Immediately after the press conference, Daniel and his team worked behind the scenes to ensure the girls' safety. They provided new identities, established secure housing, and began the process of reuniting them, where possible, with family members in safe locations. Meanwhile, the news of Amina's disclosure spread rapidly across social media and news channels. Headlines around the world read, "Teen trafficking survivor points finger at politician," and "Evidence links government official to child exploitation compound." Within hours, a respected human rights watchdog issued a statement calling for an independent investigation into the official's role. International bodies began drafting motions to freeze assets and issue travel bans against anyone implicated. The government of the official in question released a brief statement denying involvement and promising a thorough internal inquiry, a phrase that rang hollow to many observers. Yet the leak of the documents had set an irreversible process in motion. As the scandal unfolded on television screens and in print, Daniel's foundation received an outpouring of support. Donations arrived from individuals, corporations, and philanthropic organizations that had never before been connected to anti-trafficking efforts. Each contribution carried a message of solidarity and a vow to stand with the survivors. Daniel knew that financial resources alone could not heal the deep wounds these girls carried, but the surge of global attention was a powerful force. It ensured that no one could ignore their story again. Over the following days, Amina's courage inspired other survivors to come forward. In safe locations around the world, small groups of young women and girls shared their own evidence, their own accounts, and their own hopes for justice. Legal teams worked day and night to compile affidavits, cross-examine traffickers, and build cases. The official's trial loomed on the horizon, and though it would span months or even years, the fight for accountability had begun in earnest. Back at the safe house, Daniel spent long evenings speaking softly with Amina and the other girls. He listened as they whispered about school, friends they had lost, and dreams they once held. He assured them that their lives ahead would be filled with opportunity, education, and support. He arranged for tutors, therapy sessions, and creative workshops to help them express their experiences through art and writing. With each small step forward, the girls reclaimed a piece of themselves that trafficking had tried to steal. As the world watched headlines shift from scandal to trial preparations, Daniel reflected on how a single moment, Amina's decision to speak up, had changed everything. The mission that began as a calculated operation in a hidden valley had blossomed into a global reckoning. Through the bravery of one young survivor, the hidden faces behind the trafficking ring were brought to light. And though the path ahead was fraught with legal battles and emotional challenges, a new generation of advocates had been awakened by her words. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Amina traveled to meet international officials, attend human rights conferences, and speak at universities. Their message was simple but profound. Trafficking thrives in silence. When survivors speak, it brings the powerful to justice and offers hope to those still trapped. Everywhere they went, they emphasized that rescue was only the first victory. Transforming lives and systems required ongoing courage and commitment. By the end of Part 4, the world had shifted. What began as a daring rescue had become a movement. Daniel's foundation stood at its center, ready to fight not just trafficking in one remote compound, but the global networks that enabled it. And at the heart of that movement was Amina, a survivor whose words had shaken the world and whose spirit would continue to inspire action for years to come. After the intense attention surrounding Amina's brave announcement and the massive scandal it uncovered, Daniel knew his journey was far from finished. The rescue operation and its aftermath had deeply changed his perspective on life, success, and responsibility. Wealth was no longer about simply building businesses or collecting profits. It was a tool to create lasting change. Every step forward would be about giving voice to the voiceless and building pathways for those who had once been forgotten. Over the next several months, Daniel invested more time and energy into the foundation he established. With donations pouring in from around the world, he set up centers in multiple countries dedicated to protecting vulnerable children. These centers provided safe places for young people to recover, receive education, and rebuild their lives. Each center offered psychological support, training programs, and scholarships. Daniel believed deeply in the power of education. It was education, after all, that had given him the chance to rise out of poverty. Now, he wanted the same opportunities for every child his foundation supported. At the heart of these new initiatives was Amina. Her courage had touched hearts globally, and Daniel recognized her potential as a powerful advocate. She was still young, but she spoke with wisdom beyond her years. Under Daniel's mentorship, Amina traveled alongside him, telling her story at conferences, universities, and humanitarian forums. Each time she spoke, she grew stronger and more confident, her voice becoming a beacon of hope for countless others. Eventually, their journey led Daniel and Amina back to Amina's home village, an emotional return filled with both tears and joy. It was a warm, sunny day when they arrived, driving down dusty roads that wound through green fields and quiet clusters of houses. The entire village had come out to welcome them, waving flowers and colorful scarves. Elders greeted Daniel warmly, thanking him for his bravery and kindness. But it was the reunion between Amina and her family that left everyone deeply moved. Her parents, who had feared they would never see their daughter again, held Amina tightly, their eyes filled with tears. Amina introduced Daniel to her younger siblings who looked up at him with wide eyes and shy smiles. Daniel sat with the family beneath the shade of a large tree, listening as Amina shared her dreams of becoming a lawyer one day. Her parents listened in awe, pride clearly visible in their smiles. They could hardly believe that their daughter, who had been through so much, now spoke confidently about fighting for justice and helping others. In that village, Daniel made a promise to Amina's family. He pledged support for Amina's education through university and law school, ensuring she could fulfill her dream. More than that, Daniel's foundation would also invest in the local school, providing better facilities, textbooks, and teachers. And he knew that lasting change came from empowering communities themselves, not just rescuing individuals, but equipping entire communities to thrive. As they walked around the village, Amina pointed out places she remembered from childhood, places she had once believed she might never see again. She showed Daniel her former schoolhouse, a simple structure with wooden benches and chalkboards worn from years of use. Daniel imagined this school transformed, filled with bright classrooms, fresh paint, new desks, and computers to connect students to the wider world. He envisioned teachers trained to inspire students, creating an environment of possibility and hope. That evening, the village hosted a celebration honoring Daniel and Amina. Traditional music filled the air, and villagers danced joyfully around a bonfire beneath the star-filled sky. Daniel watched quietly from the side, his heart full. It was a night of healing and joy, a night where painful memories were replaced with new beginnings. He knew that what he had started was bigger than himself, bigger than any one rescue or any single story. It was about a continuous fight for human dignity, justice, and hope. In the following months, news came from international courts that the officials responsible for funding the trafficking operation faced severe legal consequences. Arrest warrants were issued, assets frozen, and the trial drew massive global attention. Amina's testimony became central to the proceedings, her calm, steady voice delivering undeniable truths that ultimately led to justice. The victory was not just symbolic. It sent a powerful message worldwide that no one, no matter how influential, could exploit others without consequence. Daniel continued his advocacy, but he also recognized the importance of supporting others to lead. He encouraged local leaders and survivors to step forward and take prominent roles in his foundation. He believed deeply in the strength and wisdom of those who had lived through difficult experiences. Empowering survivors to lead meant ensuring the foundation's impact would grow long after Daniel himself had stepped back. One afternoon, sitting quietly with Amina at the foundation's headquarters, Daniel asked her how she felt about everything they had accomplished. She smiled thoughtfully, looking out at the busy courtyard where children played and laughed freely. "I feel strong now," she said softly. "I know what happened to me should never happen to anyone else. I think my voice helped people see how important it is to protect children. But the most important thing is not just being rescued, but being given a chance to live again, to have dreams." Daniel nodded, deeply moved by her words. He saw in Amina the proof of his own deepest beliefs, that people were stronger than their circumstances, that given support, anyone could become an inspiration. He also knew their journey had been a partnership. Amina's bravery had inspired him as much as his actions had helped her. Their partnership sparked a global movement. Governments around the world began changing laws to better protect children. Schools introduced programs to teach students about human rights and dignity. Businesses pledged resources to end exploitation. The story of the millionaire and the courageous girl who stood side by side inspired millions to believe they could make a difference too. In the years to come, Daniel often returned to the village with Amina, watching her grow into a young woman whose voice echoed across continents. He saw schools rebuilt, communities thriving, and lives forever changed for the better. And as he looked back on that first rescue, Daniel knew that the greatest wealth was not measured in money, but in lives transformed and hope restored. It was never just about one night in a remote valley or one moment in front of a microphone. It was about the quiet commitment, day after day, to stand up for those who needed it most. It was about using every resource available to lift others. And in the end, it was about leaving a legacy of kindness, courage, and unbreakable hope. A legacy Daniel and Amina would carry forward, together, into the future.